Hello, I'm Kamal Santamaria. This is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, your weekly look at the world of business and finance. This week, from free market to government control. We're looking at Kazakhstan as it asserts its authority after bailing out the banks. But could this next move put the youngest and brightest out of a job? Also this week, 2 years on from the Arab uprising, and economies in the region are still struggling to find their feet. We go back to Tunisia, where it all started, and ask if the Middle East and North Africa can compete in a world of trading blocs. Plus the big lift, a blast from the past. It could either be a revolution in the making or just more hot air. Hello everyone, welcome to Counting the Cost. You know, amidst all the hype of its stock market listing back in May of 2012, few could have predicted Facebook's slump. But one man did, and he didn't work on Wall Street. In fact, he was thousands of kilometres away in the Central Asian country of Kazakhstan. Despite that, Yolan Abdikarimov will lose his job, and it's him and his story which gives us an insight this week into the changing economy of Kazakhstan. Because after first raiding the National Oil Fund for a $10 billion bank bailout, the Kazakh government has now set its sights on reining in the rest of the financial industry. More on that soon. First, Yolan's story with Forestier-Walker.
Young and smart, he predicted the share price decline of the world's top social network. Unfortunately for 24-year-old Yerlan, being dubbed Facebook Analyst of the Year by Forbes couldn't save him or his employer from the regulators. New capital requirements have put boutique brokerages like IFG Continent out of business.
It's very sad that it happened like this, because I will have to stop for some time. We had a really nice team here. We had lots of plans. We wanted to start new projects, but now we'll have to stop.
This is the Kazakhstan Stock Exchange, and I'm standing actually on the trade floor, and there's not a lot of activity going on, and there never has been. But the government says it wants to change that by reforming the financial sector and encouraging an investment culture in Kazakhstan, and the regulations on brokerages are part of that strategy. Around 10 brokerages, down from 44, are expected to survive. They'll reap the rewards of a share sell-off. A series of people's IPOs are planned, where the Kazakh public can buy shares of state-owned companies. National pipeline operator Kaztransoil raised $186 million when it floated a 10% stake in December. Kazakhstan's financial landscape is changing. The state has taken increasing control of financial institutions since the country's economic crash in 2007.
Government is everywhere. Government controls banks, now takes control over brokerage companies. Now idea about single pension fund, which is owned by state, came to be realized. So it seems government wants to manage all sectors of this market.
In a crowded brokerage market, small profit margins prompted some firms to take big risks. Brokerage Jazz Capital can afford to stay registered, but its CEO believes that forcing companies out of business is the wrong kind of regulation.
Banking professionals or like brokerage professional, management of pension funds, they are accused of wrongdoings, incompetence. I think that, yes, I agree with that. But there is also many questions to the competence of regulator. The role of regulator is just, to control how all these kids in kindergarten, I would say, behave.
Regulators say the survivors will now be better placed to compete internationally. But for Yerlan and many others, it's simply a case of being out of a job. Forestier-Walker for Counting the Cost, Almaty, Kazakhstan.
Now, as we mentioned earlier, Kazakhstan was forced to raid its oil fund back in 2008 to contain a banking crisis. But now, President Nursultan Nazarbayev has called for the merger of the country's private pension funds. Combined, those state-owned and 10 private pension funds have $21 billion. Now, the president wants that used to boost economic growth without having to resort to the oil fund again. Kazakhstan's economy, well, it actually slowed down to 5% it moved to in 2012 from 7.5% a year earlier. Just like in many other resource-rich nations, the government wants to diversify because currently we're looking at about 85% of the economy coming from exports of oil, gas and base metals. So can Kazakhstan diversify its economy? So many commodity nations have tried, and it's a long road with many pitfalls. Robin Forestier-Walker put that question to Gregory Marchenko, the governor of the Central Bank of Kazakhstan.
We do have this example of Canada and Australia, where basically, yes, they have oil and gas, they have developed agricultural industry, they have developed mining and metallurgy industry, and not much else. Yes, some manufacturing, definitely services, definitely financial services, you need it, definitely infrastructure, because in order to keep a huge country with not so much population, we do have the same structure. We do have similar geography, and I think that long term, if we are able to replicate what Canada and Australia have done in the last 150 years, that would be a good solution for our country. Things are changing reasonably quickly. I mean, US is the largest investor in Kazakhstan. So United States, directly and indirectly through BVI or Netherlands, have invested about $38.5 billion US dollars in Kazakhstan. How much Kazakhstan has invested in the United States? $41 billion. In case of Germany, Germany has invested 1.5 billion US dollars in Kazakhstan, and we have invested $6 billion in Germany. So
In direct investment?
no, it's mostly money coming from National Bank and National Fund. Same goes for Korea. We have invested more money in Korea. Same goes for Russia. There is more investment from Kazakhstan and Russia than. So again, the external debt of our government is $5 billion. External assets of our government are $58.5 billion. So our government is net creditor to the rest of the world. And people still think that, okay, these are emerging countries and these are developed countries, because a completely different debt profile of developed countries. Things have been changing very quickly.
Financial regulations have been introduced, are being introduced. For instance, on the brokerage, this requirement now for brokerage firms to have significant capital reserves. Why are they necessary?
Well, there were quite a few complaints from the public for mismanagement of their funds by smaller brokerages. And also we want to see that some of the brokerages grow and eventually develop into investment banks. That's why we believe that capital requirements for brokerages should be increased, and they're being increased. But actually that's a trend, and it's the same for banks, but capital requirements for banks are much, much bigger, and for insurance companies. So in general, if someone wants to be active in offering their services on financial markets, they should have adequate capital. It's one of the first requirements of any financial regulation in the world. So we don't believe in a sort of small brokerages or small insurance companies. And the country has been independent for 21 years now. So those who are operating these markets, they had more than enough time to raise capital. So those who are not able to raise enough capital according to our requirements, they should either merge with others or increase their capital by selling shares to outside investors or leave the market.
So the issue is, if you haven't managed to achieve anything by now, close the door behind you on your way out.
In 1997, when I resigned from civil service, I announced a tender for myself. And Deutsche Bank gave me $6 million in order to start a brokerage company. And that was 16 years ago. So if somebody has a reputation, has managerial skills, and knows how to do, why the heck now, when money is abundant, cannot he or them raise capital and or increase capital in their brokerage company? If there are not enough investors ready to put capital into that brokerage company, why consumers of their services should have trust in the quality of their services? If professional investors are not ready to buy their shares, then why should we allow unprofessional investors to buy their services?
What other reforms are required in the Kazakh financial system ahead of possible WTO accession?
You see, development of any economy and any financial sector is like building a skyscraper. And some countries stop at the floor number 5. Some countries are still living in mud huts. It's their choice. So in that sense, you always need some sort of improvement and reform. And in itself, joining WTO doesn't change much for our financial sector. It would increase competition, provided that there are more suppliers of financial services after the end of transitional period. But as I said, half of our banks are foreign-owned already. So those banks who wanted to operate in Kazakhstan, we could have a 100% owned subsidiary, and we've been running an open and competitive system for the last 20 years. So there wasn't a problem to open a subsidiary here, and we have enough competition, and foreign banks control 30 to 35% of assets of domestic banking sector, which we believe is good for competition. So in that sense, in general, we believe that our banks and our pension funds would be more than able to withstand this competition. And actually, brokerages and insurance companies need more capital and need better technologies and wider range of products in order to be able to compete. So basically, increasing capital for insurance companies and brokerages is part of this process to prepare them for the effects of joining WTO. And not only that, also there is an agreement between customs union countries, Russia, Belarus, and Kazakhstan, that by 2020 there would be a unified financial market. And that means that Russian and Belarusian financial intermediaries would be operating here without a need to create a subsidiary.
And still ahead this week on Counting the Cost, back to the blimp, how a former Soviet engineer plans to change the face of transport and shipping with a piece of retro technology. It's 2 years now since the uprisings in the Middle East began, but economies are still struggling to create jobs. And so there are calls from the likes of the United Nations, the Arab League, the World Bank for greater Middle East integration. Now, such attempts at creating an economic trading bloc have stumbled in the past, of course, due to political issues. But, the economic case really is compelling. Just think about the US and the EU, which are planning a free trade agreement. It could boost EU growth by 0.5% and create at least 2 million jobs. So here's a bit of a look now at how some of these blocs are actually valued. We'll talk about the EU first up, which is the world's largest integrated economy. More than 500 million consumers and GDP of over $17 trillion. There's ASEAN in Asia, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, a very promising group of countries there with a combined GDP of 2.3 trillion. And in fact, ASEAN's got a population of 600 million people, which puts it second only to China and India in the region. There's Latin America as well. It doesn't have an official bloc, but if you bring it all together, about $2.9 trillion worth of GDP there. The Commonwealth of Independent States, the CIS, which is a post-Soviet development with $2.5 trillion. Of course, Russia, the biggest economic force in that bloc. And there's also the South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation, SAARC, another economic bloc with a GDP of about $2 trillion. Now, in this part of the world, though, here, let's talk about the Middle East. It is worth pointing out we've got the GCC, the Gulf Cooperation Council, which is Kuwait, Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Oman, Saudi Arabia. The story out here, though, really, it's not just the Gulf region. We're talking wider Middle East and North Africa as well. Trade amongst Arab countries accounts for less than 10% of their total trade. And the Maghreb countries, North Africa, lowest share of non-oil trade at less than 5%. But as we said, the big issue is jobs. North Africa and the Middle East had 10.3% and 11% unemployment respectively last year. And according to the World Bank, 5 million jobs are needed every year for young people in the region. The GCC has created about 7 million new jobs in the past 10 years. 2 million went to nationals, 5 million to non-nationals. So can all of this be pulled together into a coherent Middle Eastern trading bloc? Earlier in the week, I put that to Ali Chebi, advisor to the Minister of Economics in Tunisia, where job scarcity is a big problem. The big problem in Tunisia, same problem in Egypt, same problem all over Middle East, North Africa, unemployment. Lots of young men, particularly, who don't have a job. What is Tunisia able to do about that for the young Tunisian population?
The model of development embraced in the past was not able to cope with the newcomers into the job market. As a result, the rate of unemployment has risen, where in 2011 unemployment reached 18.9%. Our top priority was to solve the unemployment issue, and this can be achieved through higher growth rates. Tunisia was considered to be among the countries that have a considerable growth rate, about 5% over the past 3 decades. These growth and development rates were not enough to cope with the number of newcomers to the job market, especially those with higher university degrees. As a result, the economic structures must be amended accordingly. These amendments to the structures must be done within the plan of economic reforms. In this case, we'll have to wait 4 or 5 years to see the fruits of the plans in order to achieve 6 or 7% growth rate.
Do the people of Tunisia understand this? 4 or 5 years? They're thinking, no, I need a job now, I need money now. But are they able to understand this is a slow process for Tunisia?
This does not necessarily mean that we have to wait 5 more years. This does not necessarily mean that we cannot create new job opportunities before then. On the contrary, in order to achieve a low unemployment rate, important structural reforms must be performed. In the short term, we carried out a number of reform plans according to the macroeconomy policies, whereby we amended the institutional structures. Last year, we adopted an expansion plan. We had very limited options then. We were either to follow austerity measures or adopt an expansion plan. Austerity measures were not possible simply because they will only be successful in a dictatorship model, or a national unity government where all the people have consensus towards the stability of the economy. This was not available in Tunisia. That's why we chose to adopt the expansion plan, where we can achieve income and reduce the deficit without losing balance and sustainability. We carried this out last year. This year, the unemployment rate is coming down. As I said in the past, it was 18.9%. And by the end of December 2012, the rate declined further, reaching 16.7%. And we will continue to bring this down and create more jobs.
Okay. What about the rest of the Middle East? You're here in Doha discussing the Maghreb, the wider area. What about the idea of a Middle East bloc? We have European Union, we have ASEAN, we have all these groups, Latin America, BRICS, all these things. What about the Middle East, especially North Africa? Not so much the Gulf, but more North Africa. Couldn't that area be more powerful if it works together?
Creating economic blocs or integrated economic blocs is meant to increase the level of incomes of the countries joining such economic integration. Then these countries will have more negotiation power when it comes to global issues. The other purpose of economic integration is to maintain peace and stability within the countries joining the economic blocs. Therefore, if we look to Europe since 1945, conflicts between the European countries have been minimized. The level of income has been increased, if not doubled. The negotiation powers with the other global players have also been boosted. With respect to the Maghreb countries' economy, we see a number of obstacles before the creation of the Maghreb integration. Among these obstacles is the difference of wills and desires among various investors who are willing to perform in a wider economic environment and benefit the wider economic space.
In each country you have problems. Mali is a good example. Government, rebels, separatists, all of this. You can't bring all these countries together if each country has its own problems.
لا شروط من ناحية اقتصادية بحتة.
Economically speaking and geoeconomically speaking, if we address this issue, the requirements for economic integration among Al Maghreb are not present and are not up to the expectations of the people of each country with respect to creating new job opportunities,
بما يتطلع إليه شعوب كل
the utilization of foreign technology, and taking the benefit of favouring transactions.
بنسب النمو وخلق مواطن شغل.
All these matters do not predict that it will be easy for an integration of the Maghreb countries.
المزايا التفاضلية في كل بلد ليست.
I think the integration can be reached if some development changes are done in each country.
تنبئ بسهولة الاتحاد.
Each country must adopt an inclusive growth model where we can integrate the majority of the population and enable them to benefit to the maximum degree of the economic benefits.
بموازاة مع تغيير منوال التنمية في كل بلد.
There are a number of structural problems inside each of the Maghreb: provincial societal differences, unequal distribution of wealth, investment in human capital, and also the scientific research.
احترام وبكل وتوازي مع دول الجنوب.
The project of the Maghreb integration must be parallel with the modification to the economic models of Algeria, Mauritania, Libya, Tunisia, and Morocco.
تتمكن من المساواة.
Then politically we can address and negotiate with the European economic power. On the other hand, if these countries come together and integrate, they can deal with the radical forces in northern Mali and guarantee stability and interest.
Now finally this week, something big and silver which kind of looks like a UFO. But aside from being odd looking and a bit overwhelming, it could actually be an answer to shipping problems in places that lack the right transport infrastructure. We'll let Rob Reynolds explain the rest.
Is it a blimp? Is it a plane? Is it an alien spacecraft? Well, it's none of the above. Hidden inside a cavernous World War II era hangar is a hybrid airship that could revolutionize cargo transportation. It's called the Aeroscraft, designed to carry giant loads to remote destinations and rugged terrain where planes are unable to land. This gleaming silver behemoth is the brainchild of former Soviet aerospace engineer Igor Pasternak, who looks and sounds like he could play a mad scientist in a James Bond movie.
For the next 100 years, it's new transportation system. And it's vertical transportation system.
Pasternak says the possible uses of the Aeroscraft are nearly unlimited, from moving military supplies to transporting commercial goods to providing disaster relief after earthquakes or hurricanes. It's being built with about $35 million provided by the U.S. military's Advanced Research Agency.
Just look at this thing. It's enormous. But this is only a prototype. The real Aeroscraft will be twice as big, 150 meters long, and able to carry 66 tons of cargo.
Balloons, blimps, dirigibles, and zeppelins have been used for military purposes for over 150 years, with mixed success. What really killed the airship era was the 1937 Hindenburg disaster. But Aeros engineers say nothing like that can happen to their aircraft.
To me, this looks like just a giant balloon. Is that what it is, really?
Well, actually, this is not a balloon. This is not a conventional airship. And the reason for that is because we control the buoyancy of the vehicle at any given point, which makes a huge difference.
Inside the high-tech cockpit are touchscreen instruments to control the 1 million cubic meters of non-flammable helium, propellers, and 6 jet engines. It can go 220 kilometers an hour with a range of 5,500 kilometers, carrying cargo more economically and with less emissions than existing aircraft.
10 years from now, we will got a lot of them flying in a lot of places. Sky is not limit, yeah. Sky is big enough for them.
Designers hope Aeroscraft will take to the skies in 2 or 3 years.
And that is our show for this week, but there's more for you online at aljazeera.com/business. That is where you'll find a link to the CTC page with this and all our past episodes. And if you want to get in touch, you can tweet either me at Kamal AJE, our business editor at Abid Oliver Ali, or drop us an email counting the cost at aljazeera.net is the address. But that is it for this edition of Counting the Cost. I'm Kamal Santamaria from the whole team. Thanks for joining us. The news on Al Jazeera is next.